and can
Hi,
see the...
everyone. Let me know if you can hear me.
Awesome. Okay, I'm out.
Okay, so thank you, Preet. That was a really great intro. That went over a lot of the high points. So I studied industrial design, like Preet said, and now I have the pleasure of having worked in the voice design field for over 2 years now, which is pretty incredible. So I feel like this question, what is design, is almost trolling at this point. It's such an open-ended question that you can answer in so many different ways, and I think the way that everyone chooses to answer this question is indicative of the kind of designer that they are or the kind of designer that they will be. So my answer to this question is design is the intersection of creation and intention. And I frame this in the context of starting my work as a fine artist doing painting. And then when it was time to apply for my undergraduate degree, I wanted to help people. I wanted to use my creativity, my creative drive to actually improve the lives of other people. And so when I saw the course description for the industrial design program at OCAD University, it talked about using design to meet real needs. That just was absolutely it for me. And that ended up being a continuous narrative through the rest of my career so far, the last 10 years, and has led me into what would turn out to be user experience research, because I not only wanted to just build things to meet needs, but I wanted to ensure that what I was doing was actually meeting real needs. So I've been doing user experience research for about 5 years now, and I am now a senior design researcher at Connected, like Preet said, and have been both designing and researching within the voice space. But we've got lots to cover, so I'm gonna get moving. One of the really interesting and exciting things about voice interaction design and the voice space in whole is that the conventions really aren't established yet. It's basically the Wild West out here with voice, and even really at a macro state, human-computer interaction, and that's really exciting. One of the things that I find myself worrying about sometimes is that I'm too late to something, that I've arrived too late to be innovative in certain fields, but that is absolutely not the case. You're never too late, and especially in the context of voice, we're just scratching the surface with what we can do. So I would really encourage everybody to come with me on this journey, and hopefully what I want out of this, the outcomes that I really want, is that there's not a lot of people doing voice design right now. So my hope is that you can take the principles that I will talk to you about today, and that you will go away and you will think about them and question them, because a lot of them are ones that I have just had to come up with myself during my work, because they just frankly don't exist. So I hope that in 6 months, at least one of you can come back and you can argue with me. That's my goal. Oops, I skipped a slide. So moving forward, so voice is new. So sometimes we need to create our own tools. This is a screenshot of a tool called Simile that we have built in-house here at Connected. And it is a tool that we use to test Wizard of Oz voice design experiences. Sorry, that was a coworker of mine. Voice design experiences that we're building in-house. It allows us to select from predetermined responses, but also to do custom text entry. Another example of some really fun stuff is the 3 devices in this picture are all talking to each other. We will commonly book a meeting for our devices. We will set them up in a room and we will have them talk to each other so we can run tests. So this particular test is for a client of ours who owns several hundred radio stations. And we wanted to make sure that when somebody asks in a voice radio experience, of which there are many, for a radio station, using the different ways that you can ask for a radio station, that they get the correct one. Because if you think about it, you could say, in this example, hey Google, play 104.1. And that is, that's a valid utterance. But you could also say, play 104.1, play 104.1 FM, play 104.1 FM. So there's lots of different utterances, and I'll get into that term later, that you can use. So we need to test them, because what it all comes back to is we're here to help people. As designers, we may not think that we are part of the service industry, but I assure you that we are. We're here to apply our skills and our creativity to help people, and that means finding out what they really need, not just what we think they need. What you don't want to do is design from, I call them armchair designers. You want to go in field, you want to talk to people, you want to see what you can do to help them. So let's get into it. Conversation mapping. So a conversation map basically is the visualization of voice interactions. They're quite simple to create, and they can be sketched with nothing more than a pen and a piece of paper. Although they're quite simple and quick to create, they can be really useful, especially when it comes to collaboration with your PMs, with your engineers, with your clients even, QA people. There's lots that you can do with conversation maps, and lots of voice design that you can do without writing a single line of code. One of the tools that I really love to use to do conversation mapping is called Whimsical. It is a very, very powerful tool. It is mostly free. You can buy additional boards, but I have been able to use it mostly free, quite successfully. It's a web app. It's highly shareable, and it's very good for collaborating in sort of a Google Docs style way. I've tried using Draw.io for conversation mapping, but I found that it was overpowered for what I needed, and I really like that Whimsical has quite stringent constraints, and good art comes from constraints. So it allows you to quite easily create flowcharts, mind maps, even wireframes. And so I've used it to start building conversation maps. You can find it at whimsical.com. So here's an example of a conversation map that I built in Whimsical. I'm going to get into the more granular details of the conversation map itself. But you can see here there's the invocation and greeting, there are the intents, and finally the exit of the experience, and then some other pieces that I'll get into. I imagine you all are going to have lots of questions. But first of all, let's start with the wake word. So some people may worry that their smart speakers are listening to everything that they say. That's a question that I get a lot. But the devices only really care if their name is being said or not. The name of the device is called the wake word. This word indicates to the smart speaker that it should listen to whatever is being said next. So that's the only thing it's listening for. To begin a voice experience, the user says the wake word to activate the device, and then a connecting word to grammatically link it to the invocation to launch a specific action in the case of Google, or skill in the case of Amazon Alexa. These launch words can include things like open, talk to, ask, tell, start, and many more. And since they can only be used, by any voice app, they cannot be part of the invocation itself. The invocation is the specific set of words that you say to open a skill. Next up, there's that launch phrase that I mentioned. And then finally, you get into onboarding, greeting and onboarding. So think about this. How do you want your voice app to greet the user? What's the tone of your voice app? What's the persona of the voice app itself? On the first use of your voice app, it should greet somebody in a more formal way. For instance, this is a made-up skill that I've invented for the purpose of this talk. It's called Sleep Pro. On the first use for the greeting for Sleep Pro could be good evening, welcome to Sleep Pro. As a tip, remember to label the conversation blocks as you create them. Whimsical doesn't automatically do that, so I just put some text on the different blocks. In the code, these two pieces of copy will be represented, both the greeting and the onboarding, as one, but calling them out separately in the conversation map helps with scripting, since they serve different functional purposes, one being a greeting and the other being onboarding. Onboarding lets the user know what they can do within the context of the voice app. So it helps them avoid errors, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So try to end onboarding in a question so that the user knows how to action against that. If you end with a statement, it is less clear. So this is an example also containing a reprompt. So a reprompt is sort of some conversation repair, I'll explain more, that you get for free. Whenever you ask a question, you should always script it against a reprompt so that in case the user does not answer the question, you can reprompt them to answer it again, and that will increase the chances that they will be able to successfully get through the experience. All right, so let's talk about intents. So let's switch gears a little bit and say that we're building a voice experience for a coffee service called Local Brew. And so you could leverage, in this case, the company's name for the name of their skill or action. And that would ladder up into the invocation itself. So you see here, there's the wake word, which is, it could be Alexa, or it could be other things depending on the device. And then you've got launch, which is the action. Remember, that one cannot be included in your invocation because that one can be used by any voice experience. And then the invocation itself, in this case, Local Brew. Next, the user is going to say what they want to do. So that's the part here that's in the dark gray. That's the utterance. Utterances usually contain words or phrases that describe the user's intentions within their experience. Within the utterance, there's going to be words or phrases that have been mapped to what we call intents and slot values. Intents are the action that the user wants to take, and the slot value specifies exactly how they want it done. To accurately fulfill intents, slots need to be populated with slot values. Slots are variables within voice experiences, and the list of values that are predetermined to be acceptable or not acceptable must be compatible with the slot type. An intent can be either built-in or custom. A built-in intent is one that's already handled at the system level, and so that could be things like play or pause, whereas custom intents are created by designers of the voice experiences themselves to accomplish actions outside of what is already built into that system. Usually custom intents have names to reflect what they do. So in this case, it's get cafe hours intent. And then finally, the slot value here is Sunday. So for the get cafe hours intent, the value is Sunday. All right, let's keep moving. So within the map, you'll also remember that there were lots of arrows connecting things, and all those arrows mean different things. So in this case, these are different rules that I've been coming up with, since there are not currently established conventions for visualizing voice interactions. And this is something that I've been working on for the past 2 years, a little over 2 years now. So I'm really, really excited to see how everyone thinks about these. And I'm really curious to talk to you all about how you think about and how you visualize voice interactions when you're designing them. And then getting into block types, you'll remember this as well from the map that I showed earlier. So there's lots of different block types that you can have and that the arrows will be able to move between. You've got the invocation, and everything has a label for organization. You've got replies, success states, neutral states, and then that little bell there at the bottom on the left-hand side. You'll see that that one says ear con. Ear cons are like icons, but for your ears. They are the chime that lets you know that your laptop powered up. They're the sound that's associated with the branded experience. They're a really great way of letting the user know that they've entered through a veil and that they are now within that sonic experience. So I strongly encourage you to use them. Next up, if there's playback, such as music or content like in a bedtime story skill, you could have long-form content playback. You could have reprompts, like I mentioned before, if a question isn't answered correctly. You could have system messages. So those could be all kinds of things relating to system statuses. And then persona labels. So if there are multiple personas or voices within a skill, you'll want to label them to remind everyone who is talking and when. And then you get into conversation repair, which I'll dive into more in a second. So conversation repair versus errors. So this could be conversation repair is essentially error states, but for voice experiences. And then error messages are mostly on the system side. That's not something that the user would organically encounter. It would be in the instance of something going wrong on the back end. And then help message. So that the help intent is a built-in intent, and you will find that if you try to push a skill or action to the voice experience stores without having that intent accounted for, you won't be approved, because that's something that has to be accounted for in order to pass certification. And then finally, an exit message. This is something that when the user exits the skill, you may choose to play a message or even just an ear con, like I mentioned earlier. So I've been hinting at this, but let's get into what conversation repair is. So like I mentioned, conversation repair is essentially dealing with error states when they happen in voice skills. Voice is comparatively hard for users to navigate. And so, in other words, us designers must consider how things will go wrong when users interact with the product. We need to account for things like system errors, like I mentioned before, requests that the skill or action was not built for, or for users simply saying the wrong thing. So conversation repair helps users get back on track. And this is something that I really want everyone to pay attention to, because one of the major issues with voice experiences is their notoriously poor retention rates. Only about 3% of users remain active in voice experiences in the second week. Let that sink in. So providing value and providing quick error repair is absolutely essential when it comes to designing a skill or action, voice experience of any kind, that people will want to come back to. So let's get into it. First, onboarding is the first chance that you get to prevent errors. Just like when you meet a person, you'd expect them to introduce themselves formally, just as Preet introduced me when we started this session. You'd hear their full name and maybe even what their role is, which you did in my case, either professionally or in relation to the context that you're meeting them in. So you heard my full name and my title and what potentially I could do for you. If we met at a different context, like at a barbecue, I might be introduced as, this is Hilary, Sam's cousin. And so that would provide you additional context about who I was and why I was there. So once your skill is invoked, it should greet the user, like we showed in the conversation mapping anatomy, identify itself, and then provide a short list of functions that the user can accomplish within that voice experience. Most people don't know what they can do with voice experiences because they truly don't know what's on the table. This can lead to false negatives and errors, as the user may ask for tasks that the skill may be not even built to complete. Establishing functional expectations and context early will pay dividends in the long run. So here's an example, like you saw earlier, of greeting and onboarding that lets the person know what the expectations are from them and how to proceed through this experience. Next up, don't just tell the user there's been an error. We've all encountered those frustrating moments when we fill out something wrong in a form, and all it does is highlight the box in red and says, no, you did something wrong. But it doesn't give you any other information. And frankly, that's not very compassionate to the user. It's frustrating, and it may lead to them just leaving the experience. So don't just tell them that there's been an error. In this case, you can see this is a fairly generic response, which is something that you will want to accommodate for in certain ways when you're scripting your voice experiences, having sort of a catch-all conversation repair for the first time that the user makes an error. So in this case, sorry, I'm not sure about that. Do you want to hear your options again? In this case, the user is given, again, a clear question they know how to respond to, and they can self-correct. This is showing empathy for your user. Next up, conversation repair should become increasingly prescriptive if the user continues to encounter the same errors. So this is just as if you were watching somebody stack a chair and they weren't stacking it properly, you wouldn't just stand there saying, no, no, wrong, no. You would try and help them more, right? Wouldn't you? So just in the same way, conversation repair should escalate and become increasingly detailed as the user encounters the same errors. So like I mentioned earlier, if nothing else, you at least need to have a help intent response accounted for. So in this case, if the user is in the Sleep Pro skill and they say help, they will be met with this response. Again, it outlines what the functionalities are that the user can go through and what the expectations are. So putting some guardrails on the experience helps them know what they can do within the skill. A large-scale example of how this went wrong in the past was that when Siri was launched, there were a lot of promises made about what Siri could do, but the actual functional truth of what that product could do was less than the world that was promised. But when Amazon Alexa was launched, the value prop really was just playing music and setting timers. And so people found it very, very helpful because the bar was set so low. Next up, offer graceful handoff to human help. If the user is really, really stuck, don't trap them within the voice experience. Give them a simple way out, either to talk to a human or frankly, let them exit. When being passed to human help, which you can do by connecting people via phone calls, it may not be necessary all the time, but sometimes even a chatbot can be more helpful. So consider leveraging additional screens that your voice-first experience may have access to. And then finally, end with a question. Consider the behavior of the human personal assistant. You call the assistant into your office, and then you ask them to do a task for you. They do the task, and then they leave the office without saying another word to you. No goodbye, no, is that all for now? Nothing. That would make for a very strange interaction indeed. And similarly, voice assistants and voice experiences should confirm that they have accomplished everything that the user invoked them to do before they depart. If the skill prematurely closes before the user has gotten through everything they came for, it must be invoked again, leading to some awkwardness. When crafting your voice interaction, provide the information or action that the user asked for, then ask if there's anything else that you can do for them. If we're not striving to meet user needs, then why bother? So here's an example of the reprompt that if we don't hear what the user has said, either we can't decipher what the words were that we heard, or we don't get a response at all, you're going to want to circle back, just as a real assistant would. However, if you still don't get a response to the reprompt, unfortunately, the skill will close. But let's move on. So what makes voice products fail? Like I've gone over, having inadequate conversation repair can be very, very limiting. Also, starting with ideas first. This may seem counterintuitive, but if you start with ideas first and say, we need to build a voice skill, how do you know you need to build a voice skill? You need to talk to your users first. Next up, involving engineering too late. This is very easy to do if you get excited, but I encourage you to talk to your engineering team, to sit next to them, and they will be able to continuously give you feasibility checks on what you're planning to do so that you're not trying to create something that is either difficult to do or even impossible to do. Next up, not considering business viability. So this all falls under the umbrella of de-risking your hypotheses. So just like not involving engineering on time can be very risky from a feasibility standpoint, not considering business viability can lead to, frankly, not being able to keep the lights on. So consider the ways that you can monetize your skill in order to keep growing your voice-first business. Next up, no continuous user validation. So just because you've done user testing or user interviews once doesn't mean you're done. That should be done throughout the experience. At every stage, you should do check-ins. You can do meaningful user interviews with as few as 5 people to get statistically significant outcomes, and I really encourage you to do that. I will talk more at another time about testing for voice experiences. Next up, not considering other interfaces. So I mentioned earlier that using the screens that you may have access to or that the user may have access to can be great for conversation repair and for helping users out of sticky situations. But also consider that you may not need to build a voice experience at all. This comes back to the first point. And then finally, poor VUI and UX design. VUI is voice user interface. So poor design. And then what makes voice products succeed? Product development. So working as closely as you can with your engineering team, should you have one, or being able to put those guardrails in place for yourself by using low-code products like VoiceFlow to kind of give yourself those guardrails and enable your success in creating something that's going to meet the standard that you will need to ship it to the store. Next up, using voice-specific techniques, and then finally, voice-specific tools. So let's get into some specifics on those ones. Voice-specific techniques. So some familiar things like role plays can be very, very helpful. These are 2 of my colleagues reading a script back and forth to each other. So when you start doing scripting, you can read the script back and forth to test if anything sounds awkward, because one of the major things with voice design that I found is that something may look good on paper, but the reality is the user may never see it written down, so that doesn't really matter. You'll need to actually read it out loud in order to get a real sense of how that experience is going to be. This folds well into sample dialogue writing. There's lots of templates that you can find online, or even ones that you can make yourself, that you can use to sort of make little comic strips of people and devices talking back and forth to map out how that experience would play out. And then finally, SSML and language styling. So SSML is speech synthesis markup language, and it's these little snippets of code, and you can find lots of free and available SSML samples online. You can use SSML to put breaks into synthetic dialogue. So when an assistant like Alexa is talking, the way that she speaks may sound a little odd because she doesn't need to breathe. So she doesn't take breaks where our human ears are used to hearing them. So adding a break of even 200 milliseconds at the end of a sentence can make a huge difference as far as usability goes. Next up, utterance capture. So this starts to get into the area of user research in the context of voice, figuring out what people are going to ask when they're asking for something. An interesting example of this was when I was working on a skill for a group of malls who wanted to put together essentially an assistant to help them help people plan their shopping trips at home ahead of the holiday season. And we found through utterance capture and user interviews that a lot of people were asking for movie times because in people's mental model of malls, they thought about movie theaters in the same mental space as they thought about malls, which sounds a little bit odd, but they're co-located geographically very frequently. So we ended up scripting essentially an error or conversation repair for when people asked for that. That ended up bringing people a lot of joy. I think it was something like, I can't do that yet, but save me some popcorn. And we were able to both let people know that we couldn't do that yet, but also provide a little bit of a moment of delight, which was super nice. Next up, VUI accessibility design. So again, voice user interface accessibility design. There's a lot of skills that now have intents that you can slow down their speech in order to help folks who may not be used to listening to synthetic voices, or as I mentioned, if synthetic voices haven't been styled or had SSML applied to them, so they're still a little bit difficult to parse. Accessibility design can be really helpful. And then conversation trend analysis. That is an ongoing endeavor of accounting for the way that people talk, and language is evolving, so it's something that we always have to do. Oh, there we go. All right, so voice-specific tools. As I alluded to before, VoiceFlow is a great low-code tool that you can quickly add SSML into, and then Bespoken, Lyrebird, and TalkSim are some other really great voice tools that you can create prototypes and even AI-backed copies of your voice. It's pretty incredible. So I'll talk about another one of my qualifications. I competed in this past year's first ever Amazon Alexa Cup. We were only given about 2 weeks to compete in this challenge, and we were given very few guidelines and almost no requirements. So through some design research magic, we ended up deciding that we were going to pursue Zipcar. We did some demographic research around millennials, who else, and found obvious signals that car ownership just isn't the status symbol that it used to be, with a large percentage of millennials saying that they would participate in car share services and had high expectations about integration with their smartphones. We found that there was a lot of overlap between the customer groups who were using rideshare and the customer groups who were heavily and regularly using smart speakers. And we did some gap analysis to find out where existing car sharing services were letting people down. We found that one key theme was about time estimation. So people wouldn't necessarily know how long a task was actually going to take when they were out and about in their car share. They also cited clunky onboarding and payment coordination, and just onboarding to the vehicle itself was called out as a major pain point, since you'd be getting into a car that maybe you had never driven before. And then there were also a lot of concerns around liability. So for instance, if I drop off the car and then somebody else dings it, am I responsible for that? We also looked at other voice experiences in the car sharing space. Believe it or not, Zipcar has one, and so does Car2Go and all these other offerings that we've highlighted here. We called out explicit points within the reviews that had been posted online, where there was room for growth, opportunity, and improvement. We looked at intersections of different technologies and different opportunity spaces using an activity called the creative matrix, where essentially you take a y-axis and an x-axis. You populate the y-axis with, for instance, like different experiential moments, and then different technologies or voice-first solutions that you can use to alleviate those pains. We looked at where the groupings were within that grid. We also applied the judging criteria that we had gotten access to double check that we were building in the right direction, because the judges were also stakeholders in this experience. We once again applied the judging criteria through scorecard evaluation alongside desirability, feasibility, and business viability of the concepts that we had developed. And we found that there was a ton of alignment between what we were thinking of and Zipcar's own mission statement: to own the trip, not the car. So we boiled it all down to this value proposition statement. We were designing for millennials living in cities who can't afford or don't want to own their own car. The Zipcar Alexa skill is a simple way to book new rentals and make the most of existing ones, that offers relevant information and support at each stage of the journey. Unlike Zipcar's existing mobile and web flows, our solution incentivizes first-time and repeat bookings via improved usability. But hold on. Before building, ask yourself, is voice the right medium for this experience or feature? We're in the time where we can still count how many voice experiences there are. There's about 100,000 skills in the Amazon Alexa store right now. And the older ones of you will remember when we knew how many apps were in the App Store. But more is not always better. So when you're considering building a voice experience, think about this. Is voice the right medium for this feature? Does the target user typically engage with this app or web experience when they're busy with something else? Or would the application of voice feel gimmicky? Fortunately, we proved that this space was suitable for voice. Automotive generally is. It's a great context for using hands-free technology that is minimally distracting and allows people to keep their eyes on the road while still accomplishing lots of tasks. We looked at Echo Auto integration as well, which is a new automotive-based device that Amazon has launched. And we were especially focused on reducing the friction and encouraging repeated engagement and monetization and handling of payment and bookings. We worked side by side with our great engineer team, seen here, on different technical research areas while building. Then I created some sample scripts. Whiteboards are great for doing this on. I'm just going to double check that my battery, oh yeah, we're in the danger zone. Okay, I'm just going to grab my power cable really quick, excuse me.
We have 2 questions so far. If you want to keep adding in the questions in the chat, please. So.
Perfect. Okay, there we go. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, I'll take some questions right now, actually. This seems like a natural inflection point.
Hilary, I shared 2 questions in our chat. So
okay.
You can also see just towards the end, Jane and Bertha had 2 questions. The first question by Jane was, if you get a chance to talk about user testing voice experiences, how do you approach these? And if you also go into testing the different tone of these voices. Sure.
I'm concerned that we are going to go wildly over time if I start getting into all that. But that is a great question. There's lots of so one of the challenges with testing voice experiences is establishing context, because voice experiences, one of the huge advantages to them is that they are so hyper contextual, and that you're able to handle these additional just micro moments within people's experiences of other things. And so often when I'm testing voice experiences, I will print out these little cards that have some contextual information on them if I'm not actually able to test in full real context with that person. So something on the card could say, it's the morning, you're getting ready for work, you want to listen to a podcast, but you need something that will match up with the time that you have remaining before you have to leave your house. Like, what do you ask for? And so give people that context that way. And make sure to only give them one contextual clue at a time, or else you risk overwhelming your participant. But there's a lot more I could get into, but that's another story for another day.
No, yeah, that's another webinar for another time. Yep. That's really helpful. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Hilary, that we can continue with the webinar, and then towards the end, if you have time and folks want to stick around, we could take on more questions.
Yep, let's do that. There's lots of really good questions that I'm seeing. Okay, I'm gonna jump back over. Okay, so the exciting story of the Alexa Cup Canada. So when creating sample scripts, I showed that I do some of that in Whimsical, but even before I get into Whimsical, I typically sit down with, it could be my client, it could be other stakeholders. Frequently I collaborate with my product manager or my tech lead, and we write different sample scripts on the whiteboard just to see how things go. And then, like I mentioned, doing some role playing and some chatting back and forth about them. So like it says here, even though the user is speaking to a computer, the conversation shouldn't feel like it. and then validating the conversation. So you'll want to do some initial testing. This is a really great segue. Test early and often. Like it says here, don't wait till you build a prototype to test. You can test nothing. You can put somebody in a room with those context cards and just capture how they would ask different questions. That's, like I said, that's utterance capturing, and that can be really, really helpful for doing that scripting later if you already know how people are going to ask for things. And then, like I mentioned, you can build your flow map. So this is a small portion of one of the flow maps. We ended up looking at 3 different moments within the experience. So this was a booking flow map. You can see here I've called out when Alexa is saying things with that little robot icon. And then I've also, as you'll notice, called out interaction with a phone. So you can pull out little icons of devices on there to show when there's screen-based experiences entering into the flow as well. All right, now I'm going to show a quick demo. It is a video, so pray for me. In this case, I have found my dream drum kit on Kijiji. It is an amazing offer, $100 cash for a drum kit, but I have to pick it up this afternoon in order to take advantage of this incredible deal. Now, I'm going to play a quick demo for you all. Alexa, ask Zipcar to find me an SUV for the next 2 hours.
Let me check. The closest is a Jeep Renegade 1.2 kilometers away. Would you like to book it now or hear about other options?
Book it.
Great. I've sent directions to the vehicle location to your phone. Anything else?
Nope, thank you. Now I'm looking for my car. Oh, I can't find it. Alexa, ask Zipcar to help me find my car.
Look for a green door, then take the elevators to P3. If you're there, do you want me to honk the horn?
Yes, please.
Did that help?
Yep, found it.
Great. Check the vehicle now and let me know if there's any damage before we get started.
I'll look around the vehicle. All right, now we're driving. And we're grooving. You can see the Echo Auto there. Oop.
Based on your location and traffic patterns, looks like you're 48 minutes from your drop-off point. Your booking ends in 15 minutes, but I can extend it for an hour. Sound good?
Yep. Yes, please. Awesome.
Okay, you are all set. Drive safe.
Awesome. So that was an example of a demo that we put together for the Alexa Cup. You can see that there were these major moments within that demo. So there was booking was handled via voice, a navigation to the car pickup itself. That was a moment that a lot of people called out as having friction during. So not being able to find the car, even though it may list an address, the car could be within a parking garage, or it could be hard to find. And so doing an API sweep, we actually found that the ability to honk the horn from the app was already something that was totally feasible. Next up was onboarding. So remember when it asked me to check the car for any damage before I got in. So that was there to ease liability concerns. And then next up was the in-car experience. So you could see the little Echo Auto on the dash. That was helping me estimate my time better and help me modify my booking on the go without having to take out my device. You saw that it did happen on the device. That's just something that you could then refer to once you got to where you were going. Next up, contextual awareness. That folds into what I just said. And then we also forecasted that you could do some interesting stuff with system diagnostics from there as well. And then offboarding, so dropping off the vehicle, and then prompts to report any damage, or if the vehicle needed to be serviced, you could do that then, or even just leave a review. So looking at booking in a micro perspective, looking at the closest zip car available at that time or booking in the future, and then being able to customize the make and model from there, depending on what you need. So it could be seats, it could be cargo space, and then navigation, so location-specific details, and then being able to further engage with the user to help them find their car, and even unlock the car via the mobile app. Onboarding, like I mentioned, easing liability concerns by checking for damage, and then potentially even contacting customer support if needed. So the ways that we saw a go-to-market strategy working for this, which is part of the Alexa Cup Ask, was leveraging the existing community at first. So lots of people, including myself, already use Zipcar. So applying a Works with Alexa sticker to the zip cars could be really helpful, or including calls to action within email marketing, or even just top banner in-app to raise awareness. And then building awareness in new customers, using car decals, obviously social media influencers, and potentially partnerships with Spotify, so streaming music via Alexa in your zip car. We looked at this proposed timeline of 3 to 6 months for initial launch and promotional campaign, and then further out, 6 to 12 months in integration into the car systems in partnership with Spotify, and then beyond that, deepened integration with the car systems and leveraging AI for predictive prompts, such as this one: you're low on gas, here's directions to a nearby gas station. That's something that people called out as a pain point as well, because if they're not frequent drivers, they may be not familiar with where gas stations are, and then being able to potentially self-diagnose system damage. And this went pretty well for us. We ended up winning the Alexa Cup Canada Championship and the People's Choice Award. The People's Choice Award was voted by our competing teams. And so we're really excited to bring that home for Canada. And that is my webinar. Thank you all for listening. And I would love to take some questions if anyone wants to stick around. Oh, thank you for the claps. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. As you shared about the winning trophy, I was just making a joke on Canada being on a winning streak this year.
Yeah, we're not doing too bad. There was actually a little Raptors reference in our demo. I don't know if anybody caught that. 1,000 points for anybody who caught the Raptors reference.
Let's see. Yeah. That was really amazing and really informative. And
I know that was a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we still managed to get it right on time. So we do have a few questions, and I think some of the folks are sticking back to help learn more about those questions. So another question was shared by Bertha, which was, how do you take into account of how words are used differently across regions? So
that's a question.
She shared an example, like, and I don't know if that example is more around translation. So she said, example, dipper in Quebec, but convenience store in other provinces. So that
right. Yeah, so that specific example, I think, is really interesting, because it seems like something that would be complicated, but it can actually be solved fairly simply. So one big thing to keep in mind during voice experience design is synonyms. So synonyms are words that are different words, but they mean the same thing. So you could say, like bread and a hamburger bun. They both basically mean the same thing. Like depiner, convenience store, they mean the same thing. Those are all synonyms for the same word. And so really great voice experiences, if they have quite solid synonym libraries, so they have lots of words that are mapped together into other words, they can be very forgiving. And so that's another kind of preventative conversation repair that voice designers should be considering when they're scripting their voice experiences. That's a really great question.
Awesome. The next one, so Bernadette shared a question which was more around, like, are there any general resources or places to go to learn more about voice design and voice UX?
Sure. So honestly, the Google Conversational Design Guidelines are really good. Amazon also has some guidelines on their site, but I would recommend the Google ones are just designed really, really nicely, and the way that they've laid out all the information is really well done. So I would just recommend checking out the Google Conversational Design Guidelines. Also, shameless plug, I do a little bit of writing about voice on Medium, so check me out. There's more of a longer form information that I shared today around conversation repair. If you want more details on that, that's on Medium. Yeah, there's lots of really great articles on Medium. Essentially, just search voice design. But I would recommend checking out the Google Conversational Design Guidelines first.
And after the webinar, we generally send out a thank you plus feedback email to all the attendees. So we can also include links to these two resources, including Medium publication. Then Meg asked, curious about how you document your copy decks for skills actions, especially for capturing variations, to keep the messages from being repetitive for the user. She has used Graceful, Excel, Word, Lucidchart, but she's not sure if she's found the most efficient way.
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, I think that kind of harkens back to what I mentioned about that. It's kind of the Wild West. Like to my knowledge, I would love to be wrong. There isn't a. Somebody's saying they're unable to hear me. Okay, hope that's a one-off case. Right, so there isn't a specific tool for doing copy management. That is something that I have been trying to figure out. There's one piece that I have recently come upon for version control, and it also is really helpful for QA with some of the engineers, and that is applying unique codes to each of the conversation blocks. That's something that's quite new that we've just started doing. So I will be sharing about that on Medium very soon. But it can be tricky to script interactions so they aren't too repetitive. But I would say that that's just one of the fun challenges that we get to work with every day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then we have two more questions. So one is by Brad. Brad is asking, when you're building a product, what voice recognition platforms would you recommend to incorporate? Example, BioConnect. Do you have any other recommendations? What platforms?
I would say look at Bot Society and what they're doing. There's some really incredible work being done in there. Yeah, I would say it's early days, so there's not a ton of stuff out here yet.
Okay, I just typed out the same for those of you who've heard about Society. And the last question is by Samarth. Samarth is asking, curious to know more about the factors you mentioned about when to use voice as a modality. The context of use is a major one, so indoor versus outdoor, bystanders, how much input is required from the user, and its complexity.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I would say that's like a very case by case. There's no rule of thumb. There's no overarching feedback that I can give. I would say that what you'll find is that through talking to people and through going to where your users are and doing some ethnography and looking at how they accomplish tasks, what the workarounds are that they're establishing to sort of cheat their way through situations or experiences that aren't totally designed for what they're doing, you may find room for a voice application. So like one thing that people often show in commercials for voice first products is people are always making pizza at home in the commercials. Like there's this huge, everyone's making pizza at home and their hands are so dirty and they're like, oh no, Alexa. And so that's kind of the use case that's being put forward. I don't know how frequent that is, that people are like arm deep in cookie dough. Yeah. But but that is an example of like, if you went in field and you're like, oh my God, my users are covered in cookie dough all the time, then you would say maybe that's a good case for voice. Right. But if there's something else that you're trying to get them to, for instance, fill out a form, Forms are not the best in voice, so sign-up flows can be a bit tricky. So that's where you would maybe want to leverage either using an existing companion screen, or if it is a mixed-use device, so it has a screen but it has a voice element to it, then that would be helpful probably. But it's very, very case by case right now.
Right. Yeah, I wonder how much Google Home and Amazon Alexa are trying to also pitch to small bakeries and small restaurants, kitchens.
It should be.
I think it's a good use case. Okay, so just one last question that came up, and we'll end there, which is by Soul. Soul is asking, how do you measure success for voice design?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that depends. I would step back and say, how do you measure success for voice design? Because success can mean different things to different people. So I would check with your stakeholders, see what their definition of success is, check with your tech leads, check with the VP of engineering, because these people may have all different expectations when it comes to what they think success is.
Right.
Yeah, so I would say that, and I saw somebody ask about where I got that 3% number, and I would be happy to share that link for the drop-off for second week use. But yeah, I would say find out what people mean when they say success, and then also look at your analytics, look at your use analytics. So look at how many people are initiating the skill, how far they're getting through the skill, how frequently they're coming back to it. And also, if they're kind enough to leave you a review, that is like solid gold.
Right.
So it depends what your definition of success is.
Right. Quite contextual to the outcome they're looking for. Okay, so before we wrap up, one last question I had for you, Hilary, was: are you sure that my Amazon Alexa is not listening to me all the time, spying on me? No, I'm kidding. I really do unplug it every night.
You unplug it?
I do. I'm
And it can't do its updates. They all do their updates overnight.
I know. I am a little, I don't know why, but once I tried my Amazon Alexa, I said something downstairs, like in my living room, and upstairs it immediately went like, yes, what can I help you? And I was like, it could hear me like so far. And since that day,
did you have your phone? Because if you had your phone with you, then the companion app on your phone would have picked it up.
Maybe, because I was like, I can't hear it from that far, and like, Alexa is definitely hearing all the conversation.
I don't know, man.
But thank you so much. This was an amazing webinar, amazing introduction, and sneak peek into the fundamentals of voice design for many of us that are trying to still scrape on the surface. And once again, congratulations on winning the Alexa Cup.
Thank you.
We are going to share the slides, if that's cool with Hilary, in a follow-up email, and then we'll also share the recording of the webinar. We'll upload it to the same webpage, so all of you already have the link, and we will send it back, including link to Hilary's Medium publication and other resources as well. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.